Recording. And then.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Okay. All right. Okay, who's here for design workshop? People. Sweet. Okay. So, how many of you have any idea who the hell I am? Okay.
I just found out today.
Right. Okay. So I like to call myself a ghost officer, a specter officer, because I'm busy. I used to be design director, so you know that I kind of know some things. So this workshop is, yeah.
I thought you were a programming officer.
Oof.
My last name is Gramling, so programming, it's a joke. Anyway, design is fun and good, and I'm glad so many people are here, because not a lot of people used to come to design workshops. So, your game as an experience. Just to get a feel of where you guys expect this to go, can someone tell me what you expect this to even freaking mean?
It's like what people go through when they play the game from the beginning to the end.
Okay, what they go through?
Yeah, like a mission.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say your feelings as you play the game.
Yeah?
How do you experience the game?
Yeah.
I was expecting looking at a game through lenses of here's the narrative experience, here's the sensory experience, here's the audio experience.
Yeah, there's a component of that. Here's the thing. Games are an experience. We all know that. Design has a lot of things that are very abstract things, and when you look at it in the face, it seems like, duh, this is obvious. This is like abstract. This doesn't help me. But there's always a way you can work it in. And this specifically is something where when you think about your game as an experience, well, fucking duh, like, yeah, it's an experience. So what? Like, what does that mean for when the process of you making a game? And that's what I'm going to talk about. Because this is something that I've noticed not a lot of people think about as much as they think about it. Okay, can someone describe to me their favorite game? Describe to me your favorite game.
I like Stardew Valley because I like it because it's very when I do play it, it's very like calming and relaxing. Whenever I play with it, I get to interact with the environment. I feel like I am active the place. It just having the options and tools there when I interact with the environment and other things makes me feel very free and really exploring the game as much as I choose to want to.
That's good.
Clash Royale.
Huh?
Clash Royale. I don't know. Clash Royale? No?
Yes.
Super
Yeah.
Soldier? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just like how Pulse is.
That's okay.
It's very intuitive.
So here's the thing, is a lot of times when people describe games, and Stardew Valley isn't a perfect example because people always talk about Stardew Valley in terms of how it makes them feel because it's a very feel-infused game. But a lot of times when people talk about games, they when you're describing a game in terms of what it is, we describe the components of said game. For example, if I were to talk about Warcraft 3, I would say it's a tactical game where you move your forces around and fight other people. If you were to talk about Red Dead Redemption 2, what do you talk about?
The exploration aspect and how you can when you can hunt outlaw other outlaws or things like that, have your bounty on there, how you feel like you are living the experience of a cowboy kind of thing, maybe?
Right, yeah, so when people talk about Red Dead Redemption 2, a lot of times they talk about how big the world is, how many things are in that world. In that game, horse testicles adapt to the temperature, which is wild, but there's so many things like that where, yeah, you leave imprints on mud, and it's an expansive world. There's a lot of things in it, and that's what people like to talk about, is this world feels real to me because everything, like, they accounted for every single possible thing. And they talk about how good it looks, right? These are all components of the game, but the experience of the game is, wow, this is an actual place that I'm currently in. And that's interesting. But there's more to that. You mentioned exploration. Yeah, it's very big. There's a lot of things in there. That's a thing. But the experience of that is, now I get to discover what's out there, right? So let's talk about your game as an experience. So it seems like a given, but we a lot of times we talk about the mechanics of a game. When you talk about, I don't know, Call of Duty, you usually talk about shooting. That's a gameplay mechanic. But the experience of Call of Duty isn't an experience of shooting, and it's an experience of warfare, right? And hanging out with your friends. Yelling. Okay. Yes, also that.
Yeah, lots of yelling.
Story. I love the hell out of the Mass Effect series, and usually when people talk about Mass Effect, they're like, the story is so compelling. It's an awesome story. It's an awesome world. There's like so much, intricate whatever they put into it, but that's not an experience of the game, right? That's kind of like a movie. When you describe a movie, you describe what happens in the movie. You describe the story of the movie, but what makes a movie good is not what happens in the movie, it's how you feel about what happens in the movie. So there are choices, there are systems, challenge, competition. A lot of times when you talk about game, when you talk about Dark Souls, you talk about how hard it is. Yes, that's kind of difficulty. You could say it's an experience, but you don't like Dark Souls because it's difficult. You like Dark Souls because when you succeed despite the difficulty, it makes you feel like you've improved. It makes you feel like you've overcome something, and that's an experience that you had. So all media is an experience. You don't just witness the game, we experience it. So the way I like to think of experiencing is that the act of experiencing is converting whatever you're looking at, whatever you're doing physically with the controller, into an internalized meaning to you, and it's specific to you, right? My experience, like, if I hate farming, like, my experience with Stardew Valley might be very different. Oops.
The mining, the fishing, the fighting with monsters.
Yeah. Oh, I accidentally skipped that. Whatever. Yes. It's like, so why is it important? Because is this experience worth having? Look at Dark Souls, right? It's it's experience of hardship, of overcoming hardship. Why is this worth having? Is it worth, like, if in Dark Souls you're feeling bad way more than you're ever feeling good, is that worth it? Yeah, to a lot of people, yeah. Because then when you feel the same kind of hardship in life, there's like a kind of that meaning in your head of, like, you can get past this, yeah.
Also, the rarity of rewards makes them intrinsically more valuable.
That's true.
You earned it as opposed to the game giving it to you out of pity or out of some schedule.
Right, and so that's a component of it that creates the experience of, that intrinsic reward. Is Stardew Valley, that experience of calmness, is that worth it? Yeah, because we're stressed out. We need a break. So think about that when you're making a game, right? It's good to, like, I know the focus is going to be on, oh, I forgot to write in my other thing, levels. Level design is a big part of games. And people talk about, this game is very good because of its level design. Yeah, but the level design is good because it gives you an experience of, moving through this world, of conquering its challenges, it leads you to learn, like, good level design leads you to learning the mechanics of the game without having the experience of, like, like stumbling around and trying to figure out like what the hell is even happening. So every now and then while you're working, you're like trying to design a new level. You're trying to create a boss, right? Say you work on World of Warcraft. You're making a raid. You are in charge of designing the big boss at the end. A lot of times, right, you're going to be thinking about what would be a cool boss, right? What should this boss do? Maybe think of like, it would be really awesome. Like, wouldn't it be cool to like if this boss like jumped around and like thrashed its hammer around? It would be like so epic, right? But what is that experience for the player? Maybe it's just seeing like a giant dude jumping back and forth and swinging a hammer. Like, yeah, that's cool to look at, but like, what does that mean to the player? Maybe nothing, right? So, think about it. It doesn't have to always be like, is this fun? If no, not in the game. Not every game is about fun. There are good examples of that.
Getting over it.
Getting over it.
I mean, wouldn't getting over it be in the sense of fun if like do the like I said, like the frustration of like going through it and then failing the trial and then first like getting over it, I guess, in that sense.
So there's an age-old design question of what constitutes fun. A lot of people, most people, when playing Getting Over It would not describe their experience as fun. Some designers might say it is fun regardless of what they think because of that experience of getting over it. Getting over it, Jesus. Yeah, so like what constitutes fun is iffy. But I think, to me, that's like a rabbit hole of discussion of like, is this fun regardless of whether the player would describe it as fun? So that's why I like to recontextualize that as is this a worthwhile experience, right? Because I don't know, like if I'm fighting like a really hard boss and I'm not happy, like this is not fun when I'm having. But maybe it's worth it because I hate that boss and I want it dead. Yeah.
So like in you mentioned Dark Souls a couple times.
Yeah.
In Dark Souls 3, the final vanilla game boss. When you're fighting it, when you get to phase 2, it starts playing music from Dark Souls 1, and I know a lot of people were like, oh, that is basically that's a really cool experience because I beat this guy forever ago, and now I'm getting to listen to that music, and then his play style changes back to the old play style of that boss that he fought originally, and that was a very cool experience because it reminded them of their conquest that they'd done forever ago.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of times people overlook. The experience of nostalgia, that's very much like a experience that you have, right? When you hear that music from that game that you played a long time ago, that that has meaning to you. That signifies the experiences that you had in the past. When you play a game like Shovel Knight, that's very much made to emulate old games, even though it's nothing like old games in the way that it plays. Well, it is like them a little bit, but like its design is very evolved from what games used to be. But kind of that visual aesthetic and the music, it triggers a nostalgia that is meaningful to people. And is nostalgia something worth experiencing? Arguably. People like it. People often seek out nostalgia. People like to go back to their old house and see, like you don't care about who's living there. You just want to look at it from a distance and be like, "Yep, I live there," and that evokes a feeling that humans have. Pokemon Go, in so many ways, a very poorly designed game. They had an experience that they knew they wanted to evoke, and actually no, in many ways they didn't. Is an experience of like combat, is an experience of exploring, is an experience of collecting. In a lot of ways that was muddled, and that's why a lot of people hate Pokemon Go.
I also like it a lot. there's a lot of different like audiences and how people feel about it is different for everyone.
Yeah, and experience is very much about the player. But the one thing that made Pokemon Go so supremely successful was the experience of nostalgia. You put Pokemon in there. Person who doesn't have a Nintendo console and wants to experience Pokemon again, have a free Pokemon thing that they can do in the real world. That seems like an awesome experience, and it is for a while. In my experience, it was for a while, and then I was like, "What am I doing? I'm walking around and just collect." Eventually, you realize that the experience is only meaningful because you give it meaning, and that's the case for everything. But boy, is it even more like evident in mobile games when they get sour. Yes. So let's focus more on players than the actual things going on the screen, and you kind of get a sense of why people play certain games, why people play games at all, right? Moving on. So I had a few examples of an aspect of a game versus experience that you get from it. So if you jump across a gap, you're experiencing that motion. You're also maybe experiencing challenge. You're experiencing the feeling of controlling your character. If you have a very interesting, in-depth, complex system with many moving parts, maybe Path of Exile's leveling system. To some people, that's an experience of discovery, of mastery. To other people, that's an experience of what the hell? Like, this is overwhelming. Which way do I go? What upgrades do I get? I spent like half an hour reading the whole damn thing. I still have no idea what I'm gonna do, right? So, and I had both of those experiences. It kind of swung back and forth, and then I stopped playing Path of Exile. Yes. What else? A simple swinging mechanic with an exaggerated amount of control and momentum with barely any difficulty. Press a button to thwip a web, release a button to release the web, and then swing and swing and swing. You can build up momentum to get faster. If you fall, you just land on the ground and take no damage. If you run into a wall, you just run up said wall. There's no challenge. You can build momentum out of literally nothing just by flipping a web. To a lot of people, that sounds boring as all hell. But when you get to actually experiencing it, it becomes a very, very, very popular game, and it makes you feel like Spider-Man. And it's effective as hell. Like when I look at like the actual mechanics of the game, like it like aims for you. It does like the swings for you. You can like change direction mid-swing. You have so much control, and you can build momentum out of nothing. And like it's not a challenge. And before I had the game, I was like, this seems like not fun. And then I haven't even played the game. I saw the game being played, and I felt like Spider-Man, and I'm like, they designed this good. This is an experiencing that I'm having, and I like this experience, god damn it. So, this is why this is important. It's not always cut and dry. It's not always like, looks good on paper, therefore is a good experience. You have to, A, test it with different players, and B, just be aware of what experience is this invoking. In Alien Isolation, there is an AI for the alien, the xenomorph, that it prowls around the station, mostly around where you are. The AI is constantly aware of your general area, and it like will leave for a bit and then like go where you are and then leave if it doesn't see you, right? Sometimes it just randomly decides to run in your direction, not exactly where you are, but in your general direction. And if you make too much noise, if it sees you at all, it beelines for you faster than you can run, faster than you can hide, and it kills you in one hit. and there's nothing you can do about it unless you have a flamethrower. If you have a flamethrower, you scare it away for a tiny little while. There's no hurting this thing. That, at its face, to a lot of people, is like, this isn't a game. This is getting killed, right? I can't fight this thing. What the hell?
It's like sense of fear.
Yeah, it's an experience of fear. Is that experience worth having? Maybe. I enjoyed the hell out of that. I ate that shit up. I was like, I felt like, because I love the Alien movies, as in the movie Alien and the movie Aliens, and none of the other Alien movies. But just that feeling of this being is so much more immensely powerful than I am. There's nothing I can do to it. It is smart, it is strong, it is indestructible, but I'm surviving. And I can keep surviving and keep surviving until I win the game, and then we're good. We're good. I did it. I survived this invincible thing. That's an experience. It's an experience that I liked, a lot of people liked, and it's very different from if someone else had been like, well, like a game, you want to have competition, right? You want to have that challenge of like fighting a thing, so maybe you should be able to kill the alien. And maybe there are a bunch of aliens and you kill them. And maybe there's like a bunch of Marines and they're shooting at a bunch of aliens. And now you've got Colonial Marines or whatever it's called, and everyone hated that game. It was bad. So, experience. Climbing a ladder. What a thrill. I don't know if you guys know about this, but there's a whole meme about climbing ladders and what a thrill from Metal Gear Solid games, because there was a
So in Metal Gear Solid 3, there's a really long ladder that you climb, and the game's theme starts playing when you climb that.
Yep.
Yeah.
You spend forever climbing a ladder, and then almost ironically, a song starts playing with the lyrics, "What a thrill." Yes, what a fucking thrill. I'm climbing a ladder forever. It's called the Ladder Boss. What the hell? And that's something like a lot of times, this comes back to like aspect versus experience. A lot of times a designer is like, oh, I want this level such that the player gets to this high place, right? A ladder is a quick way of doing that. But what the hell is a ladder? It's a linear experience of just one rung at a time. The player's not, the experience of the player is holding a joystick up and staring at the screen as a character does the same thing over and over again.
They tried to make that experience on purpose.
Yes, yeah, that was fine in Metal Gear Solid's thing, because they had, again, they were aware of the experience that was evoking, and that was on purpose. But in a lot of other games, it's like, why am I doing this?
What's worse is ladder mechanics that don't work, like in Payday 2, where you miss the ladder all the time and die.
Ladders are very iffy in games. They can be fun. I played a game.
Half-Life 2 or Half-Life 1. I mean, you never go up all the way.
Yeah.
VR ladder games.
Huh?
VR ladder games where you would climb the rings yourself.
Oh god.
That'd be interesting.
Maybe.
I mean, because there's rock climbing ones, right? So if the rock climbing, and then there's the rope thing, so you just climb up like that. It's the same concept.
I guess you can make it work if you know what experience you're trying to evoke, right? If it's there not because it's a ladder, but because it's gonna represent an experience that you want the player to have,
Height
right?
or something.
Yeah. So the common thread here is that the experience depends. A lot of people hate Alien Isolation. A lot of people hate Spider-Man, the game. I guess, I'm sure someone out there really likes climbing them ladders, bro. Some people like the skill system, Path of Exile. Some people hate it. Some people like Pokemon Go. Some people hate it. So the value depends on the player. And that's why you need to be aware of what experience you're creating and how that affects the player that you're going for, right? You have to be aware of your audience. If you're making a game that's targeted to kids, you damn better make it kid-friendly and not like you know, you guys know. So focus less on what is happening in your game and more on the experience it evokes. You want to make sure that your game, that it's an experience worth having. That someone can play your game and be like, oh, I didn't just complete a puzzle. I didn't just like win a tactical battle. Like I had an experience of something, and a lot of times that falls upon the design of the system. A lot of times that's just about juice and polishing the game. A lot of times that's just about having some kind of aspect of the game that really speaks to players, like Pokemon Go. Just having the aspect of Pokemon in there spoke to a lot of people, and that was enough to make a very popular game. So yeah, just know what you want the experience to be, right? When you're making something, again, think back to the thought example of the World of Warcraft boss, or think about I don't know, maybe you're designing an enemy that shoots arrows at you. What is it? What experience is the player gonna have with that enemy, right? Of course, it's important for the enemy to be cool, right? Shoot like maybe glowing like arrows and like jump and shoot at an angle, and then, but then the experience then is like, oh, do I like move like horizontally to dodge it, or do I jump to dodge it, right? Like, yeah. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
What happens if you want to depict a a message that's very foreign to an audience originally to a completely different demographic? Like you want to explain the experience of death to kids, but without showing death.
Okay. Have you seen this isn't a game example, but have you seen a film called, oh, shoot, I forgot what it's called. Get Out. A film called Get Out.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
Yeah.
That's a great movie.
It's
that one.
Yeah, no spoilers. It's
Oh,
too good
God,
for me to spoil.
yeah, it's-
No spoilers.
okay.
Go watch the movie, then we'll talk about it
Can I
later.
look up and ask like what the look looks like, and then I might say that I've seen a trailer of it. Is it recent or?
It's recent. It's a horror film. And it's very suspenseful, and it's not explicitly.
Oh, no. This one, right?
Yes, it's not explicitly about. It's not explicitly about racism, but it, to me as a white man, it gave me a relatively good experience of what, like, how that might make you feel outside of the explicit context of racism, because it's a horror film, and then connecting that feeling of horror and connecting that suspense that I have experienced to the experience of racism that I have not experienced, and it was a good bridge, I would say. Games are great at that, because here's the thing, it's really good, it's really easy to make something represent something else and lure someone in with something and have them experience an entirely different thing through
Doki Literature Club, or a bunch of other examples maybe, right?
Doki Doki Literature Club is a great example of that, yeah. Although most people, when they play the game, they know generally what they're getting into, because it's hard to, but
What was that?
it's wilder than they expect.
What was that third-person shooter that came out a while ago? That
Spec Ops the Line.
yes, probably.
That's a really good one. I've
That
never
was-
played it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's okay.
It was like, oh, it's a third-person shooter, and then I was like, no, it's psychological horror.
Yeah, that is Spec Ops the Line.
Yeah.
War is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Monsters.
Yeah.
Gets into ethics and matters of humanity very quickly. Like it feels like a bait and switch almost, but so much of it just came down to how it portrayed its characters.
That's good. I think that would be my best answer to that question, and is almost sugarcoating it, right? It's like taking something that the kind of user you're going for might not originally go for, but then like connect it, like bridge it through something.
Through
that,
PM or through some way of just speaking through rhetoric.
Yeah, something that connects to them. And then hopefully if you do it right, once they get to that second place that you're getting them to, that experience will have merit to them. Partially because of the sunk cost of like getting there to begin with, but also because of how it ties to them now personally. They will have a more the experience is already meaningful, and so if you connect it right, then that second experience will be meaningful to them as well, and they now have a better understanding of that concept that was beforehand foreign to them.
Can I throw my hat into this room?
Yes.
Because I agree with everything you just said, but I think it's an interesting question. I want to take a stab at it.
Yeah.
The way I approach this problem, which I think is very close to everything that's been said, is I like to think about it as when you're trying to capture an experience, what you kind of want to do is you want to break the experience down into the lowest level of what are the decisions, what are the conundra, what are the raw individual atomic emotions that comprise this experience. And you can, at a certain level, you can break everything down if you try hard enough. Just some just low base sets of emotions and conundras and decisions, because we like to think about decisions, we're designers.
Yeah.
That people are faced with during these experiences. And then you now say, okay, how do I create, instead of saying, how do I capture this entire big, daunting, complicated, nuanced experience, how do I capture each one of these little pieces, right? You know,
Either they do that.
Hmm?
In theater, they do that.
That's a really big thing, and that's a big part of acting technique, right? Is you know, you don't know, you've never experienced everything your characters experience, but you look at what are the parts of their experience, right? If they're, you know, if they're going through some insurmountable grief, okay, well, what are you going to need? Well, you're going to need to find some grief. You're going to need to go dig back in your own experience and find some feeling of grief, and you're going to need to find some experience of insurmountable. And then you know, cocktail that feeling of insurmountable that had nothing to do with the grief that you felt before, and you cocktail that feeling of grief that was not, by no means, insurmountable, and you mix them together, and now you have some semblance of a feeling of insurmountable grief. And you can kind of do a similar thing in game design where you say, you know, well, my player has never been scared of this thing, right?
Yeah.
This thing has never scared my player, but my player's been scared of something. So I can get some fear out of my player, and now I just need to take that fear and I'm going to put it on that thing. And well, it's not just fear, but it's, you know, it's fear because you're in a lose-lose situation. Well, my player's probably never been in a terrifying lose-lose situation, but they've probably been in a lose-lose situation. So I'm going to make them feel like they're in a lose-lose situation. And then they're already scared of this other thing, so throw in some fear. Now they're terrified of a lose-lose situation, and you can kind of start to attempt to build it up that way.
To add to
I
that,
have no idea if that's useful advice, or if I added anything, but
another thing to add is, like, for example, if you're making a game, they ask you to create the experience of losing a loved one, right? You might not have that experience, right? It's like, okay, so I think a good thing to do would be maybe go talk to someone who has had the experience of losing someone and have them do dissect what they feel, right? It's not, oh, it's not I felt that I lost someone I love. I felt grief, I felt betrayed, I felt, you know, these things, and then you're like, oh, I felt betrayed when this thing happened to me when I was younger, or oh, I felt loneliness when I was alone in my house and all this happened. So then you can use, you know, dissect the experience, put them together, and then you make the experience from
And that's
the reverse make.
Right, and that's important because there are a lot of aspects and a lot of things like we don't know about. Like if you've never lost a loved one, the idea of feeling betrayed might just have never occurred to you that that's a lot of times part of the experience. That even though you know that it wasn't the loved one's fault, you feel abandoned by them in a way. You feel betrayed by them, by the world, and that's like a dark and ugly thing to like even try to like accept. But by talking to someone who has gone through that, has mourned that, and is, you know, has gone through that experience, you can learn about all these different aspects of it that you wouldn't otherwise know. I would say, brought up theater, that reminds me, I'd like to do a workshop on motivation, because that's a like the ultimate like acting gag of like, what is my motivation? This is such a thing in games, and that relates a lot to the experience, because a lot of times, like as a designer, you want a quest where like the player has to do X and Y thing, maybe collect all these crystals. Like the experience might be like the motivation that you give the player will make that experience either like, oh my god, I'm saving the world, I'm going on this wild quest, or I'm just collecting like rocks, like this is just a chore that I'm doing, right? So being aware of the motivation of the, like what reason am I giving the player to do this thing? And that applies also to trying to have someone experience something that's foreign to them, is you want to give them a motivation, a hook into that. Why should they experience that? Why would they want to? Give them a reason, right? Give them a motivation to go after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? I'm seeing a D&D book over there, and I think D&D is a fantastic example of a lot of things in game design, but I think this is one of them. If you've ever played D&D with a bad DM, you might find yourself feeling railroaded, and that's the experience of the DM wants you to do X thing, doesn't give you proper motivation for it, doesn't let you get to that yourself, and the whole job of a DM a lot of times is pulling the player onto the right track without forcing them, and that can make or break the experience. But yeah, it can be like, if you boil down D&D to its base components, like just doing the combat of D&D, by it's kind of like a dry thing a lot of the times, but
it's just rolling dice and taking turns.
It's rolling dice, and like especially if you play a fighter, like, okay, it's my turn, what am I gonna do? Swing a fucking sword.
A lot of times.
The good thing about
Yeah.
the good thing about D&D though is not in battle situations. It's very dry unless you add character to it.
Yes.
And that's where it comes into being good, is when you add character to it.
Yeah.
Like,
and yeah.
Oh, what I feel like finding fun about the fighter is the kind of, or rangers, things that were just very attack focused, just interacting with your environment and seeing things more, seeing, oh, what do I see? I see a table, can I put the table up and make it as cover?
Yeah.
Doing those type of things add flavor and add more engagement to things instead of just saying, I swing a sword, or I
Right.
throw my sword to the chandelier so the chandelier falls, or something like that.
Yeah, yes. Experience is you ascribing a meaning to an experience. So even if like a lot of times when you do the combat, even though the mechanics can be dry, the experience is very much not exactly because of that, because you ascribe meaning to it. First you play with it, you can do all sorts of things, but like a lot of times, even if you don't do fun stuff like destroying a chandelier, like even just the act of like role playing and describing how you're swinging the sword, how you're killing the enemy, that goes like a long way into making the game a lot more fun, because you're experiencing something unique, and it goes back also to just the motivation of like, if the DM does their job right, you're not just like doing what the DM said, you are this character and you are on this quest and this is the experience that you have. So that's that. What time is it?
3:44.
Okay. Unless people have more things they want to talk about, I'm gonna call it here, and then you can still talk about it even if the workshop is over.
So if you were looking for like a specific experience, how do you think you should go about trying to get that?
Yeah, that's a good one. So design has two general processes that people go through. There's bottom up and top down. Top down is usually, I have this experience that I want the player to have. I have this aesthetic, or I have this fantasy or whatever that I want the player to have. How do I go about making that? But a lot of games are done bottom up, which is the opposite. It's less about how do I convey this experience. It's you start with one thing, maybe a mechanic, something, and then you say, what experience can a player have with this?
Yeah, I feel like most of the stuff I've made has been bottom up. But
Yes.
Do you have any tips for top down approaches?
For top-down approaches, that usually comes down to inspiration. Game jams are a lot of times a good example of that. For example, the empathy game jam that we did. That kind of forces you to do top-down in a sense, because you want the experience of empathy. What does that? And hold on. So one way that you can go about it, if you're going top-down, is, do you mean, are you talking about tips for finding what experience you want and then doing top-down, or doing top-down once you know your experience?
Like, I know what experience I want, how do I get that?
Okay. Live your life and pay attention to what things in your life, or in games that you play, media that you watch, in your social life, in your daily physical life, when do you feel this? I think that's a lot of times a good one. For example, our game, Itai Goes to the Gym, was you in a bus. And that came about from, Kyle brought up that a lot of times you're in a bus and someone in that bus will be going through something and it's uncomfortable for you, but it might be interesting. But sometimes you empathize with them, sometimes you don't. Maybe you should. And then we got into this question of the experiencing empathy in the context of public transportation. What does it mean to see a stranger just living their life and feel empathy for them? Yeah.
Adding a little more detail to the explanation, or not the explanation, but the whole limits make this concept a little easier to do. Trying to evoke feeling is a very broad concept that's hard to narrow down. Sometimes putting limitations on, well, I want to evoke the feeling of exploration within this one specific genre, or maybe a genre isn't the best example, but some sort of limitation will make you have a more tangible route to what you want to create. And that makes top-down easier, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's why game jams and even time constraints, something as simple as that, can help make it easier.
So also, one of the important things when you're trying to do top-down that really helps in game design is if you can articulate your experience. Like once you, yes, the first thing you need to do is you just need to get a good grip of your experience and where it comes up in your life and know what you're trying to do. Once you've got that, if you can articulate that in terms of hard, fast rules and individual, again, choices are amazing. Individual choices that are central to what this experience is, that can be really helpful, right? So, a really basic thing that I think is very important is, is this lose-lose? Is this win-win? Is this right-wrong? Right? Just getting to is the experience facing down one of those decision types can be really useful. And then from there on, now that you're actually designing your game, if you know that this game is about a lose-lose situation, that's a thing that you can really concretely inform your game design, is making sure that every decision the player makes, or at least the important ones, are all lose-lose situations. The player's never making a decision to help themselves out. They're always just mitigating the kinds of damage they're taking.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I mean, the classic example, which I think is a really salient one here, is if you want to get the experience of staring down Cthulhu, which is an experience none of us have ever had, but is still an experience that H.P. Lovecraft figured out how to get down on a paper, right? One of the important rules of Cthulhu is that Cthulhu is indomitable and invariable, right? So now, if you can articulate that rule, that part of the experience of facing Cthulhu is facing something that you know is indomitable and variable, well, now you know that your game mechanics cannot allow Cthulhu to be dominated or varied, right? That would just break the experience of Cthulhu. You know, one of the fun things I got to read in game design is when they designed the Transformers TCG, they actually broke down their entire design process and published it. That was a top-down game. And one of the things they talked about, right, is they were trying to get an experience of giant robots punching each other. So the thing they were really conscientious of is making sure that the most important thing in your game, the thing that happened the most in the game about giant robots punching each other, is one giant robot punching another giant robot. And these are, getting your experience down to these kinds of concrete atomic levels of, this is a losing situation. Cthulhu is indomitable. A giant robot punches another giant robot. These are essences of your experience that you can put directly into your game design.
Something else that might help guide, and this could be dangerous, but think about other, maybe think about another or a couple other experiences that are related, or like a secondary experience that isn't as important as the main experience, but it either builds, it helps build the original experience, or complements it, or even that the first experience needs. For example, if the experience you want is losing a loved one, that requires the experience of attachment, of having something that is that valuable for you. So in that example, you can't just have the player lose a loved one. You have to make the player feel that love, that attachment for something, and then destroy that. And that's where it's like, in a lot of times, experiences fail not because the moment of their experience is bad, but because of the circumstances surrounding them are bad. So if, for example, if you're not attached to something and that dies, moving on, right?
I will love this banana and I will destroy it.
Yeah.
I was actually going to have a thing about prerequisites to feelings. Something that worked for Itaigos Museum was that empathy is a thing you feel to something you personify. You either need an image of a human or something you can believe has emotion that you can relate to in order to relate to them, to empathize with them. Companion Cube is an example of a character that is entirely inhuman but was personified through the narrative and how characters talk about these things that get you to feel that. It's an important part of, it's a prerequisite to that experience even taking place.
Yeah.
Another game that I think fits this mode of thinking very well is The Witness. The designer of that proclaimed that the goal was to experience, what was it? Revelation, or some word that means that. In order to have a revelation, you have to have a false assumption about reality, or this space you're in first. They do a lot of little neat things, both in level design and in mechanics sense. Level design is just setting up tricky environments that you are going to miss key things your first go around. When you come back, you're like, oh, it was set up like that. But more importantly, in the mechanics of how they did that, they trick you into thinking, well, yeah, you could probably say mechanics, it's an oldish game now. You can do a border to like start a puzzle, but you can do that border even when you're not in front of a puzzle panel. And most people, when they see that, they're like, oh, whatever, there's jank coding. This puzzle's in world space. That it's a weird, it's just, you need prerequisites like that. To achieve epiphany, you need to have assumptions that are false. To achieve empathy, you have to have something you can empathize with, something vaguely human. There are requirements over almost every experience, and you have to understand those enough to create them.
And then, the next thing is finding a way to create that in an interesting new way. For example, with The Witness, it was like, what's a false assumption that players have? Well, they think that the game, that they're gonna think that the puzzle space is confined to these panels. And that's interesting because that's something that hasn't really been done before, at least not a lot. With the experience of losing a loved one, a lot of the more evocative games that do that either are just really, really good or find a very interesting way of create attachment to something where you don't expect, you don't realize that this is a surrogate or a representation of a loved one until you lose it and feel that loss. And then now you've had this experience. And it's unique and interesting. It's a way you haven't done before. So so this isn't required for a good game, but this might be an interesting constraint to help guide you towards an interesting game, is like, how can it do this in a way that is very different to the way you would expect it to be done? That's also interesting to me. Making games is cool. I think examples are also a really good way of doing top-down. Like if you want X experience, how have other games done this? Is a very good way of learning.
Always have the reference.
Yeah.
Do you have tips for quantifying the emotions that playtesters go through? Are there like playtesting techniques to see whether someone's actually feeling the emotions that you're looking for or what they're feeling?
Yeah, that's a very important aspect of that. Interviewing is very important. Watching their facial expressions is very important. Ryan, do you have anything for this?
Face was the big one I was gonna go for.
Yeah.
Also verbal exclamations.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Any pause they take, that means they're considering options. Important.
There was a film I was watching in theaters, I think it was The Last Jedi, and there was a very specific moment in that film that was very breathtaking. And when it happened, literally the entire movie theater, like the entire audience around me, we all gasped simultaneously. And that was an incredible experience. But anyway, one way, that's one example of something like if you're playing a game, if you're having a playtester play a game and they gasp, like you know you did something, there's something happened in that exact moment.
Yeah.
Didn't expect.
Yeah.
Some designers will actually sit behind the computer so that they can monitor their player tester more carefully, because that's where you're going to get a lot of your emotional information.
And then you can see their face.
Exactly.
No, he means like,
Yeah, like behind the computer,
the-
staring
behind the
at the
computer.
player.
Oh, just
Yeah.
staring.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
Behind
you don't
the-
see the
How do
screen.
you feel about like there's playtesting things where like you're supposed to not be in the room and you just record it?
That works
Yeah,
too, I think,
that's-
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you have the money for that.
Yeah, that's production.
We have the
Just record on your webcam.
Tobii. I'd love to set up the computer with a webcam and Tobii.
That's smart. That would be the way of doing that.
And to set up OBS to capture the Tobii, capture the game, capture the player, just record it.
Nothing but eating.
Something else that's very useful to look at in playtesting, and a lot of this like a playtesting specific workshop does better at. But one thing that I've noticed that I just realized I've never talked about, but is that a lot of times when you're having someone playtest something, you will focus on what you want the player to be doing as opposed to what they are trying to do. So if they're trying to do something over and over again and failing, we often think about like, why aren't they doing the other thing that they're supposed to be doing? And we don't think about, why are they trying to do this thing? Why is it important to them that they do this thing? Why do they think they have to do this thing? I made a game that was somewhat derivative of Betrayal House on the Hill. It was a board game. But what I was going for was more agency and openness in just the way that it played. And I wanted, anyway, we were playing it. I really like that game too. Here's the problem that I have with it that I need to fix before, not before I play it again, but like to move on, is that I made it so you can turn evil a lot more organically than in Betrayal at the House on the Hill, where it's determined randomly. I didn't want that to be random. I want it to be this thing that like someone betrays you, like, and that makes sense. That's maybe because they were sacrificing their character's sanity to like help the
you
group.
just got a friend to be a troll though.
Right. So I had one player, Eric, who wanted the experience of that. You wanted that experience of betraying people, being evil, not because he wanted to like be a troll. It was just an experience he wanted. That it was afforded by the game, and he was like, "I wonder what this is like. This sounds interesting," and he quickly realized, and so did I, that you're not rewarded for it as much, and the path there was designed to be accidental. And so I created all these mechanics for you to, like, almost accidentally stumble into betraying the group in a way that, like, the environment kind of dictated, but I didn't have anything for, like, I didn't have any, like, actual pool of, you know, kind of like
wanting to turn evil?
Wanting, yeah, like
What are the benefits?
right, there are no benefits, like in the dark side, right? If you, like in Star Wars, if you turn to the dark side, you're more powerful, right? And that's kind of like exciting for people. That's interesting.
I actually remember I started trying to intentionally curse myself in your game.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I can't do anything right now, but if I curse myself, something random will happen.
And that's more fun.
The betrayer now.
Right.
Joins us.
So the betrayer. I was just talking about how you wanted to be evil in my game, and that's when I realized that my game.
Oh.
Yeah.
That game.
Yeah, and that was, so yeah. So in that, I had thought about. You have to look at what your player is trying to do, and either find a way to discourage that by encouraging other things, or reward that. If that's what the player wants to do, then that might be a good experience, and then find a way to reward that. Yes.
I don't know the context of your game, but I'm just kind of curious. Assuming you rewarded, like you had a system to reward players for being evil, would it kind of like fall into you as would the experience want to like manage itself to not be mean-spirited as well, right?
Yeah, and that's a hard time that I've been having with it, is how do you make it, because I guess what I wanted to go for is, if the player finds themselves in a certain situation, then it becomes more advantageous to become evil, and then they're like, oh, this might be a good chance to like try this out, as opposed to like if you're like, instead of just rewarding trolling, right?
It just kind of sounds like that fine line. If you have like a chaotic evil in your D&D group and he's just being an asshole,
yeah,
it just kind of like your job is to like kind of manage that, or you just kind of let him go because it's the experience. So it's like that weird line.
I mean, if it's the experience, then it's the experience. Let them have their experience.
Well, yeah.
Well, if he does that also like ruin other people's?
Well, you have to. I mean, that's just the problem with designing a game for multiple players. Is you need to make sure that every player gets the right experience, and that no one player's experience comes at the cost of any other player's experience. But that doesn't necessarily preclude any experiences from the kinds of experiences you can allow your players to have.
I can see like there being a fine line. Like you can let them have their fun, but also making sure that they don't ruin the game for someone.
Yeah. Well, because if you lean too much towards like, if you're encouraging people to be trolls like that, then your game is going to be about trolling, right? So I guess like the whole point of thinking about your game as an experience is finding things like that and then being able to prioritize what experience do I want.
Multiplayer games have a bit of a unique challenge on this front because if you can have people that, if the game's supposed to support multiple experiences at once, everybody's experiencing the same game from a mechanical and like game state level, but the experience can be different for different people at the same time, and you have to very finely design your system for them to not step on each other's toes.
Yeah.
In a single player game, you could change the entire game on a whim to support whatever you need if you needed to, but you cannot quite have that same level of control as a designer over a multiplayer game.
That's why a lot of times the idea of roles in games is, especially in multiplayer games and MMORPGs specifically, a lot of times have roles like what kind of player are you, and that's useful because then instead of having a bunch of players and like, what if like a bunch of them want like the same experience and there isn't space for that experience, or whether they have different experience and they go different ways. If you design it so, for example, a dungeon group, like a group that goes into dungeon in World of Warcraft, you need to have someone who's a tank and someone who's a healer and this and this and that. So when you go into it, they're having different experiences, but the game like guarantee that each person gets the experience that they're having, and you're not missing anyone, and no two people are like fighting for a niche, right? So that's why that's useful. There are other ways of doing that, but that's a good way of like, having multiple experiences happening parallel without them conflicting each other. Is explicitly designing for that. And then you just hope that the person playing your healer isn't looking for a rogue experience. Yeah.
It's an interesting point that I hadn't considered, which is that players kind of enter a contract with the game when they specify the role of this is the type of experiences I'm looking for.
Yeah.
You can stratify experience based off something like, here's a class, here's a specific item you're using.
Yeah. And that's the whole reason those exist. Because otherwise you would have a game where if you want a rogue experience, you play this game. If you want a tank experience, you play this game, right? RPGs often scoop up multiple types of players by letting them choose within the game what kind of experience they want. And a lot of games kind of fail. A lot of RPGs kind of fail a little bit because you'll be looking for X experience and they have a class for that, and you play it and you're playing as rogue in this game and you don't feel like a rogue. And that can be very bad.
The idea though of like having the roles and experience things and going rogue or kind of being with a team could be related to like Team Fortress 2 versus Overwatch kind of thing. Because for Team Fortress 2, you don't have to be part of a team; you can go rogue and you're still fine. But for if you do that in Overwatch, you're kind of just out there and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I just found it interesting to say.
Yeah, different games balance that differently.
Also, it's not always classes. Consider Dark Souls again. A large factor on the experience you're doing is the item you choose to use as your weapon. You're going to have a very different play here if you're a sorcerer versus like, hey, I'm going to use Zweihander or a stalker. There's very different things for items. So it's not just like hard set by classes, but it's also by other aspects of the game.
Yeah.
What's it called? Games where you can start at the same point and everybody can go in any direction they choose and then specialize from there are kind of interesting because you never necessarily, though you can still, get faced with the upfront challenge of, well, I want this experience, but I have no idea what your classes mean. I'm just going to guess if this is the closest thing, and then they get it wrong. Because if everyone starts at the same point, you can kind of like build your character towards the way. Like literally the Path of Exile's upgrades tree is a great example of this.
Yes.
Everybody's using the same upgrade paths and same upgrade points, same everything. It's just where you literally upgrade into that defines your character, for the most part.
Yeah.
You can still
start if you want.
Yeah. But for the most part, it's a shared thing.
Yeah.
You can still get yourself stuck in an experience you don't like, but at least there it's
Yeah.
more definable.
And you can respec.
And there is the problem of it's not immediately obvious which abilities give you which experience.
Yeah.
Which
So similar to the previous.
And that, yeah, that's a design problem that a lot of games have.
Like I played Path of Exile for more, and every single time I played, I started a new character, and I was like, okay, I have no idea what this is going to do.
Yeah.
Also, in that game particularly, I played years ago, got one particular build that I homemade myself. I'm like, it's actually useful. I got a fair amount of distance. It was not useful, it was very bad.
Yeah.
But I was very proud of the experience I had crafted, and then I left the game for 6 months, came back, all the skills had changed. I tried to recreate what I had, it was not viable anymore. I'm like, oh, my experience isn't supported anymore like this. It's bad.
Yeah, see, if you look at just from the perspective of like what is like viable versus non-viable mechanics, then like the tree they made could be better, but from the perspective of experience, it created a poor experience of I lost this thing that had meaning to me. That's something that games that are updated